Hey guys, I'm back for another health update. So, I feel like there's been a lot of reflection time on this trip, which is what I expected. This trip in March, it's a lot more chill. And I think it was so needed on so many levels because I've been so nonstop since August. Honestly, since the last time I went to LA, and since I became small fat, re entered visibility, right? All these different things that happened around that time, all the way up to the mids, which is where we're at, which I have just been eating. I'm just eating. I'm going to be real, first of all. I'm just eating on this trip. I'm going to. Um, I just want to. And then when I get back, I'm going to go back to basics because I think I'm mostly maintenance at this point, but maybe a little bit over. I had one day where I ate a lot, but anyways, that's not really relevant to any of this. I'm just saying I haven't really, because I haven't been in that state of constantly being disciplined, constantly obsessing over a lot of different aspects of life, particularly like YouTube and particularly weight loss. So, without the pressures of those two things, as well as like working, my brain and time space has freed up a lot, and it's given me a lot of energy and time to reflect on what exactly is going on with me in this phase. And I think I may have figured out what is happening and why I'm struggling so much with a lot of different things. And it has to do with a huge shift that is actually related to my health journey, which I didn't really understand until this trip. Because I think a lot of times when we are moving, or go, we can't really reflect in a way that is sometimes necessary. And so basically, I I have been reflecting a lot on how I present myself. I've talked about that in terms of YouTube and in terms of, kind of in society, but I've been reflecting a lot upon it in a romantic context. Um, and I think it's just because I have to kind of see what I'm going to do, basically, or I have to see what's going to happen or where I came from. I think honestly, it's mostly like not wanting to make similar mistakes to the past. Um, like as I've been mid, I have been really focused on honestly like preventing issues before they come, mitigating things, right? Which, of course, like all of these different aspects that can make life very boring in a lot of ways because there isn't a lot happening because you make sure and you prevent bad things from happening, basically. And so I have been reflecting a lot on my past, and it isn't even just that past relationship, it's kind of like my entire dating past or the entire history of it all. And because I was reflecting on that, it made me realize that something significant has occurred, and that's why I feel so mid, or that's why I'm becoming so mid internally. So let's get into it. A lot of times in my dating past, I was incredibly erratic with guys, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to get into like past trauma aspects or anything like that. I just don't think it's relevant. But it is kind of all tied in together with E followed by the letter D, so it kind of is relevant, but I just don't want to get into it. I don't want to drag anybody down into that at this moment, and I think that it's just too much. But if we take apart the psychological aspects behind the issues I had in dating and look at the hormonal aspects, which are also very, very significant, hypothyroidism was a major thing in my life for many years, as well as the E followed by the letter D, which of course caused the hypothyroidism and exacerbated it and made it drastically worse and worse. And one of the symptoms of that is anxiety, and in severe cases, paranoia, which do not help at all in dating. I'll just put it to you that way. It doesn't help. It put me into these weird positions with guys where I would constantly be looking for something wrong, looking for some issue because I just didn't feel okay internally. So I would constantly be hyper vigilant towards anything. I would be very, very skeptical. And my emotions were very, very erratic around dating. So I'm talking like, he hasn't responded to a text, I'm freaking out over it. I'm talking like feeling incredibly entitled towards a guy's time, these kinds of things, or like he owes it to me to be in my life, like these types of feelings, which they're kind of ugly to talk about, but I understand now where it came from. In a lot of ways, it was very hormonal because I've told you guys I've been in that survival state for such a long time, and it really blunts your empathy, because when you're super morbidly obese and you're super severely hypo, you have an ED and you have all this stuff going on, it's really, really hard to actually like view things calmly and objectively in dating. I'm sure that that's really, the understatement of the century, but that's basically all I can say about it, right? And so particularly with my last ex, he was so determined in a sense to like work on me with this. It was like very project oriented, which is kind of toxic in a way, and I understand that now, but I've warned you guys a lot that when you're super morbidly obese, and especially within these toxic ritualistic patterns, and let's just throw in the hypo as well, the hypo haze as well, you end up in a lot of savior victim complexes. And I had that happen not even just with friends, but obviously romantically. Super, super common. I need a guy to save me. I need a guy to do this. I need a guy to do that. I can't do this on my own, right? I can't do anything on my own. And in a lot of ways, I think that there is some space for understanding like deep psychological issues, deep hormonal issues, all these different things. But there's also, like I said, which comes up very commonly within the issue of obesity, there is a sense of laziness or a sense of building your life around a toxic coping mechanism so that you don't have to change it. Because once again, laziness, it does connect, even if it is very hidden. It can be there. Why? Because it's so much harder to come up with new coping mechanisms and change your life and change your patterns and do all this stuff. Get up, go get a job, have your own emotional regulation and do all this stuff on your own and grow up. It's a lot harder to do those things than it is to sit in trauma, in a trauma response for your entire life. It is much easier to do that. While I don't think it's anybody's fault for being traumatized, I don't think it's my fault for being traumatized, I don't think it's productive to give people excuses to not work on it or to be overly gushy about it, because realistically, everybody goes through things. sometimes it's extremely severe, but if you were to compare it to the vast majority of human history, many people had a lot worse lives than we currently do. And they coped and were able to deal with things better than some people nowadays. I'm just saying. And some of that has to do with the incessant need to make excuses for people for being lazy that I see constantly, especially in the obesity conversation. So basically, there's more to it. But you can see the approach that was needed to be taken. I had to take extreme measures, or not necessarily extreme, but I had to take very, very, very... Stop it, Roxy. Gosh. Let them growling. Roxanne. Okay. Sorry. Anyways, not me acting like I have dogs. Okay. So anyways, don't you dare. You're going to show some respect, ma'am. Don't you dare be growling at me. Okay, anyways, so basically, I had to learn, especially in that relationship, because I was so devoted to it. I wanted it to work so badly. And there was a lot of issues with the relationship. I'm not here to, like, you know, really defend my ex or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. But because there was a lot of, like, carrot and stick type of stuff with him, where it was like he was really trying to get me to emotionally regulate. And so basically I was given the message for a lot of years that, like, my emotions are too crazy, they're too erratic, they're too this, they're too that, which to a certain extent, it was true. They were. They weren't realistic. They weren't, they were way too much. I was way too tortured for very minor things, often because I was so ill, both mentally and physically, during this relationship. And I had to work incredibly hard to regulate my emotions, to regulate my emotional responses. And I was motivated to because I wanted it to work with this guy. So I did it. I developed those coping mechanisms, as you guys know. I got out of the E followed by the letter D. I figured out the prothyroid protocol, and I dealt with my hypothyroidism, and I got better. To which, as I say all the time, I think he liked me better ill. So he dumped my ass, basically. Within recovery, but obviously, so the story goes, I was able to do it with a broken heart, and I kept going because it was self-motivated, which is something I will always suggest in terms of both E followed by the letter D recovery and weight loss, from being super morbidly obese or whatever, just weight loss in general. It needs to be self-motivated for that reason, because you can't tie it up in someone else because you don't know what's going to happen. So basically, also, you can't have all these different conditions on it being perfect for you to lose weight. That's never going to happen. So regardless, I developed these incredibly rigorous and strong self-control mechanisms in terms of emotion and in terms of not being hyperreactive, not being, like I said, erratic anymore, stabilization, and all these things. And they were skills that I still had to use quite heavily post-breakup. I had to use them a lot on YouTube because I could not get on here and act as crazy as I felt with the insane amount of weight loss related hormone shifts and things that were going on, like in 2023, for example, especially that summer. I called it on here the serotonin storm. So that was still going on. So I still had to utilize all those skills that I learned in that relationship, as well as utilizing those skills to continue the weight loss despite absolute heartbreak. So basically, I've used those skills for the vast majority of my weight loss, for the vast majority of my recovery. And my health has improved so dramatically from a year ago. And within that, I've started to realize as I got into the mids that a lot of these coping mechanisms in my earlier stages of weight loss and recovery, they're now starting to overcorrect, or they're not quite working as much. So as I've told you guys in the last video, this is things like resistance-based weight loss. For example, it's not working anymore. I need to have a more positive motivation to move forward. The more negative I am, the less motivated I am now, which is a huge difference from how it was. But this is another aspect too. Emotional regulation is starting to make it harder. It's becoming suppression, because I have in my brain, it's as if I was trying to wrangle together and express and process all of these very intense emotions, like as if I was a teapot just shooting out the steam out of the spout in a very, very methodical way and rigid way to deal with them and to process and to be able to continue to survive, essentially, physically and psychologically. So I couldn't literally suppress everything, but I had to have very specific outlets in very specific contexts and just do things that way and be very in control at all times, or be working towards being in control at all times. And I'm starting to understand that as that steam has started to dissipate and there's less and less of it, I'm realizing that these days, as I've gotten healthier, my less intense emotions are now becoming suppressed. And it's starting to, you guessed it, demotivate me. Not just in terms of weight loss, but also in terms of YouTube and creatively. It's creating creative stifling, as well as, in some ways, romantic stifling, because things like getting nervous about texting a guy used to feel like life or death, but now it's just getting nervous, which is normal, for example. And it's the same thing with YouTube. So things that maybe in the past I could read a comment and it would send me into a panic attack or a spiral, these days it's just merely irritation or anger. The emotion of shame online, for example, it was something that in 2023, it was so gripping to me due to the hormonal landscape I was living through in being super morbidly obese and losing that weight as a very emotional person, that I had to be really careful about things online so as to not upset people as much, or to try to mitigate things. Whereas now it's starting to become a little boring, because even in that time when I was very methodical and like very, very deliberate about my outlets and stuff and trying to hold together my emotions, there was still enough that would come out that it was still like kind of interesting, or a lot, or mean, or whatever you want to call it. But now it's like, when I apply that same force of those skills, it's so stale in comparison, because there isn't much behind it anymore. I don't feel that much anymore. So it's like it's starting to suppress these less intense emotions, which are then creating this drive towards boredom, basically, and frustration creatively, and frustration within weight loss, because I'm realizing, like, hey, you can't suppress normal emotions, or you can't apply these old coping mechanisms to the new you. It's not working. you're starting to suppress yourself. And it's creating pressures that are making it more difficult to continue, which is the whole point. And so that's why I talk about this stuff on here, because this kind of stuff I think is really, really relevant to the mids, because your health becomes much less of a concern. And I have to find a new way to express myself or to be less inhibited. It's okay to be a little bit more vulnerable sometimes. It's okay to talk about things or to just be more human, which I have been. And I've been doing it a little by little, and you guys have been very, very supportive, extremely supportive. You know, I think that that's one thing I've noticed that means a lot to me, is that being mid and boring and stuff, to me at least, I have been so much more accepted, or I felt so much more loved in that in general. Like, especially like being around my friends and stuff, like I feel so much more appreciation from people in my life being mid and boring, and creating that space for other people's feelings that I couldn't quite do in previous phases. And it's really made things so much more satisfying in real life. And I've been working on things little by little. And I'm surprised. You know, I think the old disordered me would have been absolutely shocked about this fact that being mid and boring is definitely better than being a hot mess all the time. And I think a lot of times people that are in that disorder, they really feel like it makes them something better or something more interesting. It's the same thing with the fat activism community. They really, really feel that, and I can see now, being removed, being mid, being distanced from that was never the case. It actually makes you less interesting as a person, especially to people in your life. And I'm assuming especially to romantic options as well. So what does that mean going forward? It means that I'm going to be more free in how I create. And if somebody pisses me off and I want to say a bitchy thing, I'm probably just going to say it. If I really feel somebody and I really relate, then I'm going to really, really relate. I think I want to be more emotional. You know, I think there has been definitely benefits to being cold or colder and more logical, but I think that has had its day and it's time to move forward. And I've already been doing it slowly, and like I said, you guys like it better, so don't think it's going to be anything crazy. It's just understanding I've graduated from that, and I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to be as guarded as I used to, because oftentimes I had to guard against myself. I had to guard against my own powerful emotions fueled by multiple layers of disorder, and that doesn't exist anymore. And that's what I'm understanding with all of this reflection. So if that made any sense to you guys, thank you for understanding and listening. Even if it didn't, thank you for listening if you got this far. And I will see you guys soon. I'm going to be recording something soon. We're going to start up again. But this reflection period has been really, really helpful for me personally. Talk to you later.